The air in the rental car tasted like stale cigarettes and regret. I hadn't smoked in years, not since. Well, not since. But it clung to the upholstery, a phantom scent of a life I'd tried to outrun. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple, the kind that promises a storm but never quite delivers. Just the oppressive weight of it. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a rough stone in my gut. I'd received the official notification a week ago. A solicitor, all hushed tones and creaking leather chairs, informing me of my grandmother's passing. Estranged was putting it mildly. I hadn't seen her since I was a child, not since the incident. The doll, Leela, the name still made my teeth ache. She'd left me everything, this decaying monument to a forgotten era. Why me? The GPS had finally given up the ghost about 10 miles back, its digital voice sputtering out in a series of glitches. Now I navigated by a faded map, a relic from another age, much like the house I was heading towards. The asphalt gave way to gravel, then to a rutted dirt track swallowed by overgrown hedges. Branches scraped the sides of the car, a percussive accompaniment to the frantic drumming in my chest. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into shapes that weren't there. The gates loomed ahead, wrought iron twisted into grotesque, skeletal forms. They groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, rusted hinges protesting my intrusion. Beyond them, Blackwood Manor rose from the mist, a hulking silhouette against the dying light. It was larger, far larger than I remembered, or perhaps it was just the sheer density of its decay that made it seem so imposing. Gargoyles, weathered and grim, leered from the eaves. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from a facade of crumbling stone and peeling paint. The only other sound was the distant, mournful cry of a crow. I stepped out, the damp earth sucking at my shoes, the scent of damp rot and something else. Something cloyingly sweet, like overripe flowers, filled my nostrils. It was the smell of neglect, of things left to fester. The front door, a massive slab of oak, was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The hinges shrieked, a sound that echoed through the cavernous foyer. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that penetrated the grimy windows. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of disuse and something else. A faint, powdery perfume, like old lavender, and beneath that, a sharp, metallic tang that I couldn't quite place. My footsteps, tentative at first, grew louder on the marble floor. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow me, their painted smiles frozen in a perpetual, unsettling rictus. I recognized my grandmother's stern gaze in one, her lips thin and disapproving. But there were others, faces I didn't know, their expressions ranging from placid to outright menacing. I walked deeper into the house, drawn by an invisible current. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Just the house settling, I told myself. Old houses do that. But the sound had a deliberate quality to it, a soft, measured tread. My gaze fell upon a small, ornate table in the corner of the foyer. On it, nestled amongst a scattering of yellowed letters, was a familiar porcelain face. White skin, rosy cheeks, painted blue eyes that seemed to hold an unnerving depth. My hands trembled as I reached out, my fingers hovering inches above the doll. It was smaller than I remembered, but no less terrifying. The stitched smile seemed to widen, a silent, mocking invitation. This was impossible. He should have been gone, burned, destroyed. How had she gotten here? A low hum started, subtle at first, then growing in intensity. It seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house, a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my bones. My vision swam. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The doll's painted eyes felt like they were boring into me, and for a fleeting, horrifying second I thought I saw them gleam. I had to get out. I turned, my escape route the only thing on my mind. But the massive oak door, which I'd left ajar, was now firmly shut. I pushed. It didn't budge. I rattled the handle. Locked. How? I distinctly remembered leaving it open. Then from the depths of the house, I heard it. A faint, childlike giggle. It was too high-pitched to be real, too innocent to be anything but utterly, soul-destroyingly wrong. It was the sound I hadn't heard in 20 years, the sound that had haunted my nightmares. My eyes darted back to the doll on the table. There was its head tilted slightly. The sweet, cloying scent of lavender intensified, thick and suffocating. I backed away, my hands instinctively going up as if to ward off an unseen blow. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to acknowledge what I already knew. He was here, and she remembered me. I found myself drawn against my will towards a dimly lit hallway. The hum grew louder, and the metallic tang in the air became more pronounced. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar. It led to what looked like a security station, a stark contrast to the decaying opulence of the rest of the manor. Inside, rows of monitors glowed faintly, each displaying a swirling, chaotic gray. Static. Nothing but static. It was the guard break room, security monitors showing static. A futile attempt at vigilance, perhaps, or a deliberate obfuscation. The air here was stale, tinged with the faint, acrid smell of old electronics and something else. Something coppery. My gaze swept over the blank screens. They were supposed to be showing the grounds, the entrances, but there was nothing. Just the endless hypnotic churn of white noise. Then on one of the monitors, for a single agonizing second, the static cleared. A flicker, a shape, a small, pale hand. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed again by the blizzard of interference. But I had seen it. The house wasn't just old. It was alive, and it was watching me. What had my grandmother been protecting me from all these years? Or was she the one who had invited it in? The rental car sputtered to a halt at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. Blackwood Manor loomed before me, a silhouette against the dying light, all sharp angles and shadowed gables. It looked less like a home and more like a monument to decay. The paint peeled like sunburnt skin, revealing the gray, weathered wood beneath. Twisted vines clawed at the stone foundation, their tendrils thick as my wrist. The air here was different, heavy. It pressed down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. It smelled of damp earth, of things long dead and forgotten. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rustling of unseen things in the overgrown bushes. A chill, unrelated to the evening air, snaked up my spine. My hands, clenched on the steering wheel, were clammy. Years I had to do this. For closure, I told myself, for the money. But mostly, I suspected, for a ghost I couldn't shake. Stepping out of the car, the gravel crunched under my worn leather boots, a sound that seemed to echo far too loudly in the stillness. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the cold metal of the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to get in that car and drive until the memory of this place was just another blur in my rearview mirror. But I pushed the door open. Moonlight, filtered through grimy, leaded glass windows, cast long, distorted patterns on the floorboards. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped from the high ceilings like macabre decorations. Everything felt, watched. My footsteps, tentative at first, grew bolder as I ventured further into the house. I moved from room to room, each one a time capsule of my grandmother's eccentric life. In the parlor, a grand piano sat draped in a sheet, its keys like yellowed teeth in a forgotten smile. A faint, discordant note seemed to linger in the air, a phantom melody played on silent strings. In the library, books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded, their pages brittle with age. I ran my fingers along one, the rough texture of the leather a stark contrast to the smooth polish of my own skin. A faint, dry scent rose from it, like pressed flowers and old secrets. I found myself drawn to a smaller, more intimate room off the main hall. It was clearly my grandmother's study. A heavy oak desk dominated the space, littered with papers, dried inkwells, and an assortment of peculiar trinkets. A half-finished letter lay on the blotter, the ink faded, the handwriting spidery and almost illegible. I couldn't make out the words, but the sheer volume of them suggested a desperate urgency. On the wall, a collection of framed photographs showed a younger, stern-faced version of my grandmother, her eyes sharp and knowing. And then I saw it. It was empty, but the faint impression in the faded fabric of the seat suggested it had been occupied recently. A shiver traced its way down my neck. It was in the back of the house, in what looked like an old servant's quarters, that I found the guard break room. A worn table and chairs, a chipped coffee maker, and a bank of security monitors. It flickered with static, a chaotic dance of white noise. I stared at it, a prickle of unease growing. What was it supposed to be showing? Why was only one monitor active, and why was it filled with such disarray? The static seemed to pulse almost as if it were breathing. There was someone watching me. The engine died with a final, rattling cough. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects in the encroaching weeds. I killed the headlights. The mansion, Blackwood Manor, swallowed the last vestiges of twilight, its darkened windows like vacant eyes staring out from a skeletal face. My grandmother, I hadn't seen her since I was a child, not since Leela. The air inside the car was stale, a mix of old leather and my own nervous sweat. I fumbled for the keys, my hands clammy. The driveway was a choked path, branches scraping against the rental's sides like bony fingers. Each groan of metal against foliage sent a fresh tremor through me. I told myself it was just an old house, just a house. The heavy oak door creaked open with a sound like a dying breath. Dust motes danced in the single beam of my flashlight, swirling like miniature ghosts. The foyer was vast, cavernous. A grand staircase, draped in cobwebs, ascended into darkness. The scent of mildew and something else. Something cloying and sweet like decaying potpourri filled my nostrils. It was the smell of neglect, of time standing still or worse, regressing. My grandmother had been a recluse. The lawyer's letter had been brief, almost dismissive. Inheritance. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't wanted this. But here I was, standing in the maw of Blackwood Manor, a place I had only ever visited in nightmares. I moved through the downstairs rooms, my flashlight beam cutting shaky paths through the gloom. Furniture lay shrouded in white sheets like slumbering giants. Every floorboard protested my weight, a symphony of creaks and groans that echoed through the stillness. I felt watched. A prickle crawled up my spine, the familiar sensation of unseen eyes. It was childish, paranoia. I was an adult, a successful artist, for God's sake. This was just old house stuff. My grandmother's study was at the end of a long, dark corridor. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, stacks of books teetered precariously on every surface. Papers, yellowed and brittle, were piled high on a massive mahogany desk. A faint scent of lavender, sharper than the general mustiness, hung in the air. I ran my fingers over the spine of a leather-bound tome. The pages felt rough, abrasive. I started sifting through the papers, a desperate need to find some explanation, some reason for this place, for my grandmother's isolation. Letters, receipts, old photographs faded to sepia. And then beneath a stack of brittle newspaper clippings, I saw it. A wooden box. It felt heavy in my hands. The latch was simple, a small brass clasp. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was Leela. He was exactly as I remembered, porcelain skin unnaturally smooth, painted blue eyes that seemed to stare right through me. A faint, fixed smile on her lips, a smile that promised nothing good. Her dress, a faded lace confection, was immaculate despite the years. A tiny, perfect bow in her yarn hair. He was smaller than I recalled, more delicate, but the sheer wrongness of her was amplified. My breath hitched in my throat. This couldn't be. I had seen her destroyed. I had seen her. I pushed the memory back. I had to. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. The room seemed to tilt. The scent of lavender intensified, sickly sweet. I could almost hear a faint, tinkling music like a broken music box. It was a sound I hadn't heard in 20 years, a sound that had been buried so deep I'd thought it lost forever. My heart hammered against my ribs, not a dull thud, but a frantic, panicked rhythm. I dropped the box. It clattered on the floor, the lid flying open. Leela rolled slightly, her painted eyes fixing on mine. I scrambled back, stumbling over an ottoman. My knee hit the floor with a sharp crack. Pain, but it was a distant sensation. The room swam, the feeling of being trapped, of being watched, of something utterly, irrevocably wrong. I was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, my vision blurred, tears pricking my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. Leela, he was here, he had always been here, waiting. How? I forced myself to look at the box again. It was just a doll, a toy, but the primal fear that gripped me was anything but childish. It was ancient. It was all-consuming. It was the fear of something that defied explanation, something that had burrowed its way into my deepest subconscious and had never truly left. How could she be here? And what had she done to my grandmother? The air inside the car was stale, heavy with the scent of old leather and my own rising anxiety. I sat there, engine dead, the silence pressing in. Blackwood Manor loomed, a silhouette against a bruised sky. The chirping of insects, once a simple sound of nature, now felt like 1,000 tiny claws scratching at the edges of my hearing. I didn't want to go in. Every instinct screamed at me to turn the key to find a road away from this place. But the inheritance papers were in my briefcase. My grandmother, she'd been a recluse, a shadow in my fractured childhood memories, and Leela, the doll. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since that summer. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. Stepping out, my boots crunched on gravel that felt more like bone shards underfoot. A sliver of blackness beckoned. I pushed it open. A gust of wind, smelling of dust and decay, snaked out, raising goose flesh on my arms. My flashlight beam cut a shaky path through the gloom, illuminating motes of dust dancing like phantom insects. The grand foyer was a mausoleum of forgotten grandeur. Cobwebs draped the chandelier like macabre lace. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the marble floor. I moved through the downstairs rooms, each one a tableau of neglect. A grand piano, its keys yellowed and chipped, sat silently in the ballroom. A portrait above the fireplace, its subject obscured by grime, seemed to watch my every move. I found the servants' staircase narrow and steep and began to climb. My breath hitched with each creaking step. The higher I went, the more the house seemed to sigh and groan around me. It was an old house, of course. Old houses settle, they creak, but this felt different. It felt Alive, I was halfway to the second floor when I heard it, so faint I almost dismissed it as the wind. But it came again closer this time, a child's voice. "Dean!" My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, straining my ears. Nothing, just the settling groans of the house. "It's the stress," I told myself, my voice a shaky whisper in my own mind. "The move, the memories. You're hearing things." I forced myself to keep climbing. My flashlight beam swept across faded wallpaper, peeling in strips like sunburnt skin. Doors lined the corridor, each one a potential Pandora's box. I checked them one by one. Empty bedrooms filled with the ghostly shapes of shrouded furniture. A dressing room, its vanity mirror cracked, reflecting a distorted version of my own pale face. Then I reached the end of the hall, a single door slightly ajar. This was the room my mother had always warned me away from, her grandmother's study. I pushed the door open. The room was small, cluttered. Bookshelves overflowed with leather-bound tomes. A heavy oak desk dominated the center, covered in papers and trinkets. And there on a velvet-lined shelf sat Leela, porcelain skin chipped in places, glass eyes unnervingly bright, fixed in a perpetual vacant stare. Her dress, a faded lace confection, was stained and torn. She hadn't changed, but the air around her felt thick, charged. A cloying sweetness like overripe fruit filled the room. I took a step back, my hand flying to my mouth. No one, my body was rigid, every muscle screaming with tension. The floorboards beneath my feet groaned. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. My breath came in ragged gasps. I backed out of the study, my eyes never leaving Leela. The doll's painted smile seemed to widen in the dim light. I practically ran down the hallway, my flashlight beam bouncing erratically. I needed to get out of here, now. I stumbled down the servants' stairs, my mind a frantic whirl. It was all too much. I needed confirmation, something tangible to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I remembered seeing a small security room on the ground floor near the back entrance. My grandmother had hired a night watchman, a grim-faced man I'd seen lurking around the grounds the previous day. I found the room. It was small, windowless, and smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A single desk sat against one wall, cluttered with empty cups and a half-eaten sandwich. Mounted on the wall above the desk were several security monitors. All of them were filled with static. A low, persistent hum emanated from the equipment. I flicked a switch on the main console, just the swirling gray snow of the screens. The guard break room, security monitors showing static. A perfect, empty space. I sank onto a worn chair, my legs threatening to give out. The static on the screen seemed to pulse, to hum with a silent, unseen energy. I closed my eyes, trying to regain some semblance of control. Then a sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the hallway just outside the break room door. Tap, my eyes snapped open. The static on the monitors seemed to shift, to coalesce into vague, shifting shapes. There was that. A face. I stood, my body tensed, ready to bolt. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't the sound of wood. It was higher-pitched, sharper, like fingernails, small fingernails, tapping against the metal door. My gaze was drawn back to the monitors, to the swirling static. Was it my imagination, or was there a tiny porcelain hand appearing in the gray? The tapping stopped. Then a giggle, a child's giggle, high and sweet, echoing from the other side of the door. What was on the other side of that door? The air in the guard break room was thick with the stale scent of lukewarm coffee and something else, something metallic like old pennies. The security monitors blinked their indifferent, static-filled eyes at me. Rows and rows of fuzzy gray, punctuated by the occasional flicker of a ghost image. It was supposed to be a place of surveillance, of watchful eyes, but all I saw was a blank canvas mirroring my own inner void. I ran a hand over my face, the stubble rasping against my palm, the canvas in the studio. It pulsed, not physically, of course, that would be madness. But I felt it, a thrumming beneath my skin that mirrored the frantic beat of my own heart. I'd been trying to paint, trying to capture the light that sometimes bled through the oppressive gloom of this house, but every brushstroke felt wrong, tainted. My fingers traced the cool, smooth surface of a charcoal stick. It felt alien in my hand, a tool I usually wielded with precision, now clumsy and uncertain. The memory of the doll, Leela, her porcelain smile cracked and peeling, her glass eyes glinting with an ancient malice, clawed at the edges of my mind. I'd locked her away again in the deepest recess of the attic, but the echo of her presence was everywhere. It seeped into the very air I breathed, into the dust motes dancing in the shafts of weak sunlight. My easel stood before me, pristine white rectangle waiting to be defiled. I'd intended to paint a landscape, something to remind myself of the world outside these suffocating walls. But my hand, guided by an unseen force, began to move differently. The charcoal smudged, then gouged. Shapes emerged, not of rolling hills or sun-drenched meadows, but of twisted forms, hunched and deformed. I saw it then, reflected in the blank screen of a deactivated monitor. A flicker, a distortion in the static. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror, my own features warped and elongated. My jaw clenched. This wasn't just fatigue. This was something else, something that was worming its way into my very being. The charcoal scraped against the canvas, a dry, desperate sound. I was no longer painting. I was excavating, digging into the buried dirt of my childhood, unearthing the rot that had festered for years. The doll's face, that vacant, knowing smile, began to form beneath my hand. It wasn't a conscious effort. My muscles moved with a life of their own, driven by a primal fear I thought I'd long suppressed. I could feel a phantom touch, a faint pressure on my shoulder like a small hand. I flinched, dropping the charcoal, my breath hitched. I could smell it now, faint but unmistakable. The cloying sweetness of decaying roses, the scent that had always clung to Leela. It was in the room. It was in me. I looked at the canvas. It was no longer a blank expanse. It was a grotesque tableau. The doll's face, larger now, dominated the center, its eyes burning with an unholy light that seemed to emanate from the charcoal itself. My own reflection in the static-filled monitors seemed to shift. My eyes, usually a clear blue, appeared clouded, the pupils dilated, reflecting the distorted images on the canvas. A tremor ran through my hands. I wanted to stop, to scrub the canvas clean, to burn it. But my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. It was as if the charcoal itself had fused with my skin. I could feel a prickling sensation on my scalp, as if unseen tendrils were weaving their way through my hair. The metallic tang in the air intensified, sharp and coppery. There was the smell of blood. I forced myself to look away from the canvas to focus on the static. It swirled, coalesced, and for a fleeting second I saw it. A small, pale hand pressed against the glass of the monitor, fingers splayed. Then it was gone, swallowed by the gray. My own hand trembled as I reached out, my fingertips brushing against the cool glass. The static hummed, a low, guttural sound. I could feel a presence behind me, a suffocating weight in the air. The scent of roses was overpowering. What was Leela doing to me? The guard break room, with its flickering fluorescent lights and the hum of the security monitors showing static, felt like a cage. I traced the condensation on my chipped mug, the lukewarm coffee doing nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The static on the screens wasn't just a technical fault. It was a veil, obscuring something I desperately needed to see. My grandmother, a woman I'd barely known, had left me this house, this mausoleum, and she'd left Leela. I'd spent the last few days sifting through her belongings, each item a whisper of a life I couldn't grasp. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating stacks of old journals, their pages brittle and yellowed. I'd avoided them, afraid of what I might find, afraid of what she might have written. But the weight of Leela's presence in this house was suffocating, a constant gnawing unease that seeped into my dreams and my waking hours. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, a coppery undertone beneath the stale coffee. It reminded me of something. A memory, sharp and fragmented, pricked at the edges of my consciousness. I closed my eyes, trying to grasp it, but it slipped away like smoke. I ran a hand over the rough wood of the table, my fingers catching on a splinter. The static on the monitor seemed to intensify, the gray fuzz coalescing into fleeting shapes like faces seen through rippling water. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass. Then I saw it, a faint outline, a distortion in the static that resolved itself into a child's drawing rendered in crayon. A crude, stick-figure family and a doll. A doll with wide, vacant eyes and a smile that was too wide, too sharp. Leela, my stomach clenched. This was on one of the monitors, a feed from what looked like a nursery. My nursery, the journals. I had to look at the journals. My hands trembled as I reached for the nearest stack, the leather covers cool and dry beneath my fingertips. The first one I opened was filled with my grandmother's spidery script, detailing mundane daily events, but as I flipped through the pages, a different tone emerged. Entries became more frequent, more frantic. She's watching, it tells me things. Dean is so sensitive, he feels it too. My breath hitched. She knew. She'd known about Leela's influence even then. I flipped further, my eyes scanning for dates, for any mention of the event that had fractured my childhood. October 17th. The date jumped out at me, underlined twice. He took him, the doll promised him. A gift, a way to forget, but the price. The words blurred. The metallic scent was overpowering now, thick and cloying. I could feel a prickling sensation on my skin, a phantom touch. I looked up at the monitors. The static was breaking, not clearing but distorting, swirling with an unnatural intensity. Images flickered through the nursery, the doll on a shelf, my own small, terrified face. And then a clearer image hunched over something on the floor. A child, and beside the child, Leela, the doll seemed to be. Leaning, my grandmother's journal continued. I tried to stop her, but he is too strong. It feeds on fear, on memory. He needs to forget, for his own good. The doll said it would make him strong, resilient, but it twists everything. The specific event, I knew it was coming. The memory, suppressed for so long, was clawing its way to the surface. October 17th, the same date. The accident, he fell, he shouldn't have been so close to the old well. Leela, he was there, always there, she whispered to him, encouraged him, and when he fell, he was the first thing he saw when he woke, smiling. The well, the old, disused well at the edge of the property. I'd been playing, daring myself to get closer, Leela tucked under my arm. She'd felt heavy wrong. And then, the ground had given way. The fall. The sharp, blinding pain and Leela's painted smile inches from my face. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the journal. It landed with a thud, pages splaying open. The metallic smell. It was the smell of blood, my blood, from the fall. The images on the monitors flickered faster, a chaotic montage of my past. Leela always present. Leela always watching. My grandmother's frantic scrawl continued, a desperate confession. I gave her to him, I thought. I thought it was just a toy, a way to comfort him, but she latched onto him, twisted his innocence. And then when he fell, she made him believe it was his fault, that he deserved it, that he was protecting him. Protecting him, he had caused it. And my grandmother, instead of taking Leela away, had done nothing. He had let Leela twist my perception, let her convince me that the fall, the pain, was a consequence of my own failing. A lesson from the doll. The security monitors went black, all of them, the static died. But the silence was worse than the noise. It was heavy, expectant. What had my grandmother meant by the price? What had Leela truly promised her? And why had she kept Leela in the house, waiting for me? The chill wasn't just in the air. It was a slick, oily film that coated my skin. I could feel it clinging, a second skin woven from damp and dread. I'd found old journals. My grandmother's spidery script detailing her growing unease, her fear of Leela. She hadn't been protecting me. He had caused it. He had let Leela twist my perception, let her convince me that the fall, the pain, was a consequence of my own failing, a lesson from her. The attic door, a warped plank I'd wrestled open with a crowbar, had been a mistake. Dust motes danced in the single beam of my flashlight, each one a tiny, spectral dancer. The air up there was thick, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something sickly sweet like overripe fruit. Leela wasn't there, but the feeling of being watched, of being played, intensified with every passing minute. It was a pressure behind my eyes, a tightening in my chest that made each breath a conscious effort. I descended the creaking stairs, the wood groaning like a dying animal. Back in the main hall, the grandfather clock, its face cracked and hands frozen at 3:15, seemed to tick in my mind. A phantom chime echoed, a single mournful note that vibrated in my bones. I needed to get out. I needed to call someone, anyone. The thought of the outside world, of sunlight and normal sounds, felt like a distant dream. My hand trembled as I reached for the heavy oak front door. I jiggled it, then pushed, then threw my shoulder against it. The wood didn't budge. It was as if it had fused with the frame, an immovable monolith. Panic, sharp and icy, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. I tried the side door, the one that led to the overgrown gardens. Locked. The back door, the one I'd used to fetch firewood, bolted from the inside, though I distinctly remembered leaving it unlocked. A faint giggle, high and childish, drifted from the upper floor. It was too clear, too close to be a trick of the wind. My muscles tensed. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Nothing. I remembered the guard break room. It was a small, windowless space off the main kitchen, intended for the security personnel who used to patrol the grounds. It had a landline. I'd seen it there, a relic from another time. Maybe I could get a signal, make a call. My steps were quick, almost a run, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The door to the kitchen swung inward with a low moan. The air inside was stale, tinged with the faint, metallic smell of old food. The guard break room door was ajar. I pushed it open, my breath catching. The room was small, crammed with a battered table and 2 chairs. On the wall, a bank of security monitors, their screens blank, stared out like dead eyes. Static flickered across them, a silent, restless storm. The landline sat on the table, its receiver dangling precariously. I snatched it up, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. Dead. No dial tone. My eyes darted back to the monitors. The static seemed to coalesce, to form shapes in the swirling gray. Faces, indistinct at first, then sharper. My own face, pale and terrified, looking back at me from one screen. Then another showing the front door, the one I'd tried to open, now seemingly warped, the wood twisting into grotesque, leering visages. But I wasn't there. I was standing in the guard break room. They were words of invitation, of entrapment. The air in the small room grew heavy, suffocating. I backed away from the table, my gaze locked on the shifting images. The house wasn't just holding me. It was showing me that I was already lost within it, that every attempt to escape was merely a step further into its suffocating embrace. Was this Leela's doing, or had my grandmother always intended this for me, this slow descent into a gilded cage? The air in the guard break room was thick with stale coffee and something else, something metallic and sour. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the oppressive quiet. The flickering fluorescent lights above hummed a sickly, off-key tune, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe like trapped things. My eyes darted to the bank of security monitors, static, just a blizzard of white noise, punctuated by the occasional ghostly flicker of a distorted image. It was useless, all of it. I leaned against the cool, scarred surface of a metal table, my grip tight where I gripped the edge. The dampness from the basement still clung to me, a constant, clammy reminder of what I'd found. Not just dust and decay, but a suffocating presence. Leela, he was here louder than ever. "You can't escape me, Dean, never." The memory of my grandmother's brittle fingers pointing towards the sealed-off section of the basement flashed behind my eyes. She hadn't been mad, not entirely. She'd been afraid, and now I understood why. The doll wasn't just a toy. It was a vessel, a conduit, and it fed on. What? Fear? Regret? My childhood trauma twisted and amplified. I closed my eyes, trying to push back the encroaching tide of panic. The artist in me, the part that had always sought to capture and control, fought against the encroaching madness. I had to use what I'd learned. The symbols etched into the floorboards. The strange, guttural chant I'd found scrawled in a hidden journal. It was all a desperate attempt to anchor myself, to find a weapon against this insidious corruption. A sudden, sharp crackle from one of the monitors made me jump. My head snapped up. For a split second, a face flickered into view, distorted, blurred, but undeniably hers. Her painted smile, stretched impossibly wide, seemed to mock me. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, swallowed by the relentless static. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But it wasn't pure fear anymore. There was a brittle shard of defiance growing within me. She wanted me to break. She thrived on it, so I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I pushed myself away from the table, the metallic tang in the air growing stronger. It was the smell of old blood, I realized, a primal scent that stirred something deep and ancient within me. I remembered another detail from the journal, a faded passage about the doll's true nature, a hunger that could only be sated by. My gaze fell on my own hands. They were shaking, but I forced them to steady. The symbols, the chant, they were meant to repel, to bind. But what if they were also meant to channel? What if the doll's power, its very essence, could be turned against it? It was a dangerous thought, a desperate gamble. But I was out of options. I walked out of the guard break room, the static hissing behind me like a dying breath. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of unseen movement felt like a deliberate prod, a taunt. I could feel her watching me, her unseen gaze like a physical weight pressing down. I could hear it then, a faint, childish humming. My breath caught. It was her. I started up the stairs, each step a deliberate act of defiance. The wood groaned beneath my weight, a mournful protest. The humming grew louder, clearer, a twisted lullaby. It was the same tune my grandmother used to hum, a melody of comfort now warped into something sinister. And there, bathed in the faint moonlight, was Leela. She sat on a child-sized rocking chair, her porcelain face unnervingly serene, her glass eyes fixed on me. The dress she wore, once pristine white, was now stained and frayed, a ghost of its former glory. She didn't move, but I felt her presence surge, a palpable wave of malevolence washing over me. "You're mine now, Dean, always were." My hands clenched into fists. I could feel the familiar tremor of fear trying to take hold, the urge to flee, to hide, but I wouldn't, not this time. I remembered the journal, the final, desperate entry. The doll's weakness wasn't just in the ritual. It was in the recognition, in facing the source of its power. I focused on the doll, on its vacant, painted smile. And then, with a surge of adrenaline, I began to speak. Not the guttural chant, not yet, something else. A name, my grandmother's name. The name he had whispered to me in her final moments, a name meant to break the curse. The doll's head tilted ever so slightly. The humming stopped. A low, guttural growl, impossibly deep for something so small, emanated from its painted lips. What had I just done? The air in the guard break room, security monitors showing static, was thick with a damp, metallic tang. It clung to the back of my throat, a taste I knew too well from the hours spent in this cramped, windowless space. The monitors themselves offered no comfort, just a blizzard of gray and white, a visual representation of the chaos that had become my life. Each screen flickered, a silent testament to the unseen forces that had coiled around this house, around me. I gripped the heavy iron poker, its cold weight a grounding sensation against my clammy palm. The journal lay open on the scarred formica table, its brittle pages whispering forgotten secrets. Recognition, facing the source. The word swam before my eyes, a desperate beacon in the encroaching gloom. I had to see her, not just her form, but the truth of her. The smell of dust and decay intensified, a suffocating blanket. Each creak of the floorboards was a jolt, a phantom limb reaching out. I told myself it was just the house settling, just old timbers groaning under the weight of years. But the tremor in my hands betrayed me. I reached the basement door. It was ajar, a sliver of blackness beckoning. It carried a faint, cloying sweetness like rotting flowers. It was the scent that always preceded her. Taking a breath, I pushed the door open. The hinges shrieked in protest, a sound that scraped against my nerves. The concrete floor was slick with a fine layer of grime, and the walls, damp and stained, seemed to press in on me. And then I saw her. He was in the center of the vast, empty space, perched on an overturned wooden crate. Leela, the doll, smaller than I remembered, yet infinitely more terrifying. Her porcelain face, once painted with a child's innocent smile, was now a cracked mask of malevolence. The other, a glassy blue, seemed to gleam with a malevolent awareness. Her faded calico dress, frayed and stained, hung loosely on her small frame. The air around her vibrated, a low hum that I felt more than heard, resonating in my bones. It was a sound that promised only oblivion. "This is madness, Dean, she's just a doll." But the journal's words echoed, a defiant counterpoint. Recognition. I raised the poker, my grip tight. My voice when I spoke was a raw rasp. You did this." The doll remained still. Her painted lips curved into a perpetual, mocking grin. The single eye fixed on me, unblinking. "You fed on it," I continued, my voice gaining a desperate strength. "On the fear, on the pain, you made me see things." I took a step forward. The hum intensified. The air grew heavy as if the very atmosphere was resisting me. "You're nothing without the fear. You're nothing without me believing." I took another step. The doll's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The single eye seemed to bore into me, stripping away layers of my carefully constructed calm, of what I was too afraid to face. The hum reached a crescendo, a piercing whine that seemed to vibrate the very foundations of the house. The air grew thick, suffocating. I could feel the doll's presence, not just as an object, but as something alive, something ancient and hungry. And then, in the periphery of my vision, I saw it, a flicker of movement. It was amorphous, shifting, but undeniably there. It was the shape of my childhood nightmares given form. My grip tightened on the poker. I had to break the connection. I had to sever the thread that bound us. With a guttural cry, I lunged, not at the doll, but at the space around her. The iron connected with something unseen, something that yielded with a sickening, tearing sound. The hum abruptly ceased. Leela sat, unchanged, on the crate. The single eye still stared, but it was just glass now. The cracked porcelain was just chipped ceramic. I stood there, panting, the poker still clutched in my numb fingers. I had faced it. I had recognized it, and it was gone. But as I turned to leave the basement, the scent of rotting flowers still lingered, faint but persistent. And on the static-filled monitors in the guard break room, I could have sworn, just for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something more than just snow. Was it truly over? The house remained a silent, watchful sentinel, and I was still here, trapped within its decaying embrace.